two, one. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another exciting film journey here on Inside Movies Galore. I am one of your hosts, but today we are continuing. We've decided to make this whole year one big long theme, basically, kind of, sort of, except for when it comes to birthday months and Halloween and Christmas and things of that nature. But we have pretty much the whole year themed with franchises. And I'm going to hand this over to our good buddy Jake because he started us out with a doozy.
Yeah, get out of that pie, Jake.
This is yeah. Get out of the pie and tell us exactly which movie you subjected us to this week.
All right. So we are, I am on, right? Yes, we are continuing our trip down the bakery aisle with J.B. Rogers' 2001 film American Pie 2, which, as you can probably guess, is the sequel to last week's American Pie. In this one, Jim and his friends are now in college, and they decide to meet up at the beach house for some fun. Pretty simple, to the point. Basically, the film fans are stalwart heroes finishing up their first year at college, and getting into a bit of funk because they don't really know where to go from there. So, on the advice of Kevin's older brother, they go to rent a house on the lake, and, good times ensue for most. So we will go ahead around the room here. We'll start. I'll start on my right here. Tammy, is this your first time watching American Pie 2, and what are your thoughts on it?
No, it's not my first time. Like we said last week when we were on that, David and I had watched the whole thing not that long ago on a different channel. So, it was fine. I mean, I think in some ways I think the first one was funnier.
Mm-hmm.
But there were still some fun things and everything, I just think that there was a little bit more jokes and a little bit funnier the first time around than there was this time. So, but it was still fun, It it is what it is. It's supposed to be fun, So.
Right. Alrighty then. Well, how about you, Dave?
Well, I'm no stranger to the American Pie series, but it's not exactly a high point on my film radar of films. Yes, I do enjoy certain aspects of each film. There is some comedy that comes from it and stems from it that I will never forget. But not sure when I first saw this movie. I had to have at least seen the first three at least several times because it seems like a lot of my friends like the rom-com sex comedies, and like I said, I still think this comes from Napoleon Dynamite territory than Lampoon territory, but I do enjoy at least the first two in this series. I'm not sure about the third one as much because I don't remember it as much. But and I don't even think I ever saw a reunion or anything beyond that. So I can't really say to the latter on that those subjects. But
well, your chance is coming.
The main character, Jason Biggs. Well, in the first one, he kind of reminded me of a dumbed down Adam Sandler. Well, in this one, at least his hairdo was a little bit changed. So that remind me as much, but he still kind of sort of reminds me of like Adam Sandler type character. Okay, so but at the end of the day here, I didn't mind it. So I guess to each their own. There are some things that haven't aged. So
okay. All right. How about you, Brandon?
Well, this is not my first time watching it, though my first time watching it in a long time. Other than American Reunion, this is probably my least watched of the four. Where I think I've watched this twice, and I've watched American Reunion only once. But I remember first watching this and enjoying it, and then looking around and saying, why is everybody hating on this movie? I mean, I understand why, but, to me, I think it's a funny movie. And, I watch it now and I think to myself even more. I feel like it does. A lot of people look at this as the black sheep of the series. Those other four on the lower panty being excluded. But I really do think that this is a necessity. This is a necessary part of the franchise, and I'll talk a little bit more about it as we go. But I enjoyed it this time around, in some ways more than the first one. So I do think that it's a fun film, and it was great revisiting it. I was kind of glad to get an excuse to jump in and open my collection and watch this one.
All righty. And for me, I guess I could agree with the idea that out of the first four, this is sort of a black sheep of the four for me. In large part because the movie definitely falls into a major trap for, well, this movie had several strikes against it. One, the original film was a raunchy comedy. It was intended to be a gross out comedy in some ways. Like, there are different things that gross people out. And I am much more squeamish about gore than I am about sex. But people who go to either genre wanting to be grossed out a bit, the first movie delivered in many ways there. It's also just a teen comedy or a young adult comedy, a romantic comedy, a coming of age story. Maybe not that one as much when we get to the point I'm going to, but almost all of those little subgenres, you need the expectation is usually that the sequel will top the original. And so this one had to outdo everything the first movie did just by virtue of being a sequel. So there is that strike against it. Also, I never realized this, but they actually filmed an entirely different movie. They filmed two major plot lines that I watched multiple scenes from in the making of commentary that are not in the film. Chris Penn played Stifler's dad and had multiple scenes. And Stifler's dad isn't, I think, mentioned once in the final cut of the film. So it kind of sucks for Chris Penn, but but apparently test audiences didn't give a damn about him. And there was also an entire plot where Heather and Oz were cheating on each other, and everyone hated that, so they got rid of it and replaced it with a decent, more milquetoast romance story. And they basically replaced Stifler's dad by bringing in his brother for a few scenes later on. So I think they were probably good changes, but the fact that the movie went through such a torturous change while it was being filmed also affected.
Well, it sounds like they filmed a rough cut and put it in front of audiences as kind of
They
like
did.
a test
Yeah.
run, and then it went to the chopping block floor.
Yeah, the test screenings were not good, apparently.
Yeah.
What's up?
Saying I'll agree that this one, the biggest flaw it had was that it had very little to no originality, and almost every joke was a rehashed joke from the first.
I have always said that, but I would actually disagree with that on this viewing, because watching it, knowing more than I did about the background, I actually learned all that stuff I just said last week because I was watching the bonus features on the first movie, and it ended up they were cutting back and forth between all four movies. And so I picked up a lot of stuff that I wouldn't have gotten if I'd done one movie at a time. So it saved me the trouble of doing it this week. But I went into this viewing with that. The movie definitely rehashes a lot of the first movie. And I've always called this one sort of a pale retread. But watching it again, I do feel like a lot of the story is a natural evolution. It is a natural sequel. And it definitely sets up what is to come. This is the part of the story where Michelle becomes a major character. The part where her romance with Jim starts. There's a lot that really gets played in story-wise that is not exactly a rehash of the original. But in terms of the set pieces, the jokes, most of it hits the same beats. And it really did make the movie feel much less original than they obviously had hoped it would be. In the end, I think it's a fun movie. I enjoy it. It has its moments. And one interesting thing that we'll get to later, the way you watch things at different points in your life can have a major impact on how you view them. And of course, with these movies, some of the stuff hasn't aged super well as we've gotten older, like things that we thought were freaking hilarious when we were in college. Now we look back, especially post Me Too, but now we look back and go, But one of the biggest issues I had with this movie was a few of the third act things that really stretch the imagination, if you will. Second act, too. There are things that happen in this movie that you're like, I'm not so sure that would ever happen. But at least one specific one that I'll mention later, coming back to it from now versus then, I'm like, you know what? I can buy it. I couldn't buy it before, but I can buy it now. So, like I said, we'll get to that when we get there. But so yeah, overall, enjoyed watching it again. I still think it's probably the weakest of the four. We'll know by the time we finish if that opinion holds up. But I felt a little more impressed by it this time, I think, than I have before. So that's a good thing. But anyway, we'll launch into plot, and if Dustin comes along, we'll loop him in, I guess. As I mentioned before, we find, Well, one of the things where the movie kind of it starts on a similar note. In the first movie, Jim was watching illegal channels. Here, he's actually about to have a dalliance with a young lady. His second sexual encounter. And she's like, it's just friendly goodbye sex. And he's like, well, we haven't had friendly hello sex, but they go ahead, they're getting ready to do it. And just like in the first movie, his parents walk in on. As you do.
They get the RA to unlock the door. That's
yes. Yes. But you can
and then
tell.
of course.
What's that? What's that, Dave?
Well, and then of course, not only do his parents walk in, but her parents walk in too.
Yeah. Now that part was kind of weird. Like, did they have co-ed dorms? Like, how would her parents know to come there? That was one part I was kind of like, okay, I get it. I'm like, I get the joke, but
I know.
And I think that was one of
the guy playing her father is dead now.
Oh.
I guess I was assuming that like her parents knew that they were friends or going together or something, and went looking for her, as somebody probably pointed them to go there.
Yeah, it's hard to say for sure. I do feel
nothing
like
goes unseen in a beta house.
I do think this is probably one of the parts where they leaned in hard into that one-upsmanship and let that take over instead of quality of storytelling. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, what's more embarrassing than Jim's parents walking in on him again with a girl this time? Having her parents walk in. That's like, okay, well, yeah, you got to up the bar. But it's probably one of the most unrealistic moments in the movie, I thought. But now, the RA letting Jim's dad in, I can believe that. It was the end of the semester. He probably didn't give a damn anymore. He just wanted to go home.
they missed a great opportunity for a American Pie college movie.
Well, isn't that what the Beta House is supposed to be?
Yeah, I guess so. But I mean, like with the original cast.
Yeah.
What happened during that year?
They might have wanted to do that, and it might have just been, maybe not.
Of Futurama's National Lampoon's Animal House take Robot House.
Yeah. I'm sure offers were made. I don't know if who would have gone for that, but I think this way was probably one of the most logical ways they could have done it and actually brought nearly everyone back. Because, yeah, that first summer is probably one of the few times everyone will try to get together. It gets harder and harder after that. And then, of course, everyone does try to get back in East Great Falls or whatever it is. And they all get back together at Stifler's. And, of course, the cops shut them down. And they don't have anywhere to go. So that's when, Kevin's complaining to his brother. And his brother's like, well, here, let me tell you, this is what you got to do. And, they go together. They rent a house. Somehow, Kevin gets them up to the moment of departure without letting them know Stifler's part of the deal. You'd think they might have inquired a little better, a little sooner, but whatever. Finch is sitting there. I've been running the numbers, and 4 of us are not going to. Yeah, I asked someone else to come along. So they go to the lake, and This is something that I still want to do. I have not gotten to do the beach thing really at the lakes. I've only been a couple of times. I guess Dave and Tammy, you guys would have a better idea of this sort of thing that they were up to doing. It looks a lot of fun. Like, I loved it. When we rented a beach house in North Carolina, that was awesome. I want to do that again. But I could imagine this would have been a lot of fun for them, but expensive.
Running the beach and taking your beach towel down to the beach and maybe getting part of the surf or whatnot. Not.
Right. It's just crazy.
Although I'm not exactly planning on doing the polar plunge anytime soon.
I suppose it would be rather polar at this moment in time, wouldn't it? But yeah, it was. So they get out there, they get this pretty nice place, although Finch is apparently unimpressed.
I liked how they did this.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to walk away before because I wanted to say I love the concept.
Mm-hmm.
I really wish that it was able to do it, like be able to like take this beach house for the summer, do part-time jobs during the day, and then party and enjoy like life with your friends coming back. That would have been a very cool thing to do as a college thing. And where they're positioned at, I admit I've only seen one of the Great Lakes, and it wasn't the best view of it. It was like, I think it was probably the same. I don't know. You might have seen more of the Great Lakes than I did. But I know you saw the same view I did that one time I saw it.
Yeah. We visited friends in Cleveland, and we were on the south shore of Lake Erie, and it was still pretty cool. It was to me, knowing that it was a freshwater lake, but it was like pretty much almost the same as the shores of the Chesapeake. It was really interesting. It was kind of fun.
That was a cool thing being on one of those big lakes but have the big beach and the waves and all of that.
Yeah.
It's just something that's foreign to those of us who are nowhere near one of those lakes.
Yeah. Yeah. Virginia has a few lakes, only 2 of which are natural and none of which behave like that. Like even Smith Mountain Lake, Kerr Lake, Lake Anna, the artificial lakes, they're not built that way.
Lake Moomaw, Lake
right. Yeah.
That was the lake for me growing up.
Right. But anywho, like I said, it's pretty cool. It made me want to go. But so they get settled in. They go around looking for work, and they find a job as house painters and end up all kind of working together as a team, sometimes reluctantly. Meanwhile, a few things have been set into motion, one being that Jim has found out that Nadia is coming to visit at the end of summer, and she really wants to see him. Like, really wants to see him and has made this clear. But of course he is a basket case of insecurity and very concerned about this encounter. Finch is pining over Stifler's mom, and during the party he sneaks into her room and finds a book on tantric meditation and decides to take up Tantra to prepare for whatever life may bring. Kevin and Vicky have broken up, but they're still doing the friend thing. And it's obviously one of them is much more into it than the other.
I can understand that.
Yes. Heather and Oz are still together, but she's going to Europe for a summer learning program. Exchange thing, and Stifler is Stifler.
Get your balls off me!
Right. Well, that was
I got beat on.
Yes. Okay, so that happens again, trying to one up things. We had the scene in the first movie where Stifler accidentally drinks an ale
Although-
that has some special ingredients.
That dude
he-
had to pee worse than Ogre and the Nerds too.
Yes,
And
here,
that person who peed on him ended up being Sulu on the new Star Trek.
well, yeah, that was John Cho. Yeah, the MILF guys get tired of waiting for the restroom, while Stifler is pulling his shenanigans on a drunk young lady, Christy, and he has some champagne, and she decides to get kind of kinky and pour champagne on his head, tells him to close his eyes, and Cho, I don't know that he actually has a character name other than MILF Guy number one. Cho accidentally knocks a flower pot off, knocks her out with it, and then starts peeing. And Stifler doesn't realize at first that it's not champagne. Although at one point he's like, "How'd you get it so warm?" It's like, oh my God.
Well, you know,
When he said that, when he said that part, I was like, "Oh, come on, dude, really?"
He's like, I can taste the bubbles.
Yeah.
No, I can't. Yes. So Stifler gets humiliated again. In fact, the cops are already there when he walks in with this stricken look and goes, "You got peed on." It's like,
I love his reactions to certain things because there are a couple of advancements. Yes, they do recycle a lot of the old jokes for that and decide, let's top that joke with this joke.
right.
But there are a couple of things that did there. I mean, he was doing his typical thing at the beginning, except for those other two basically talking about, like, is that true that Finch guy did that to your mom? And just to see his like expression go from
Oh,
go
and
from his
actually, one
typical
of the
to-
very best reactions. One of the very best reactions, and I think in the whole series, is in the so-called lesbian scene that we'll get to later. But when the one of them says, to Jim and Stifler, "That's how you kiss your mother," and Stifler just wheels on Finch and says, "Don't you say a thing."
Yeah, I just love the reactions. I mean, when Stifler finds Finches at the party, like I say, it's just he is really good about taking that reaction where he's doing that typical, asshole personality. Then suddenly, as soon as that, you could see that smile go right off his face.
Right. Actually, that party, I was just reading, apparently that party he did a lot of ad-libbing, and some of the reactions that the cast had to Stifler were perfectly genuine because he just ad-libbed, and he did a lot in that party. Apparently, one was when someone when Vicky and I think it's when Vicky and Kevin are talking about how many people they've slept with, and then like Stifler just asked Jessica, "What about you? How many chicks you sleep with?" And she just looks at him like, "Wouldn't you like to know?" But that was apparently ad-libbed, and that was her genuine reaction to it. So that was kind of funny. And also the part, I always thought this was a stupid ass line, but now I'm amused by it. When he goes up to a couple of girls and he's like, I'm Steve Stifler and I have an 11-inch penis around. Think about that. He was filming Evolution when this film was filming started for this one. Like, I think he was kind of working on both together. And supposedly David Duchovny dared him to say that.
And then it made it into the movie.
What's that?
And then it made it into the movie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was amused by that. What?
I don't think that there's any woman that would really be wanting one that's that wide.
Yeah, I think that would be more horrifying than anything.
I mean, yeah.
But at any rate, so we got through the first party. Like I said, they get out to the lake. Does anyone have any thoughts on these early parts that we haven't covered? They want to throw out a scene that we missed or whatever?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think we've covered a lot of the beginning pieces.
Okay.
He did the parody of the whole Sherman thing where he was like, instead of the, what the hell are you doing here? It's like, no, man, I'm really glad that you're here. And then, of course, when he says, oh, yeah, it's like, fuck off, That,
you fucking dipped or something like that. Yeah. I do like that they did give the MILF guys more to do in this one. Like, they gave them a lot more lines and definitely beefed up the roles a little bit. But
Shoot, Cho ended up being a bigger actor than half of the main cast.
I know. It's like I said, from humble beginnings and whatnot. But at any rate, so they get into the groove, doing this, that, and the other. They're all working. Heather and Oz start trying to keep things exciting by trying phone sex, which I'll admit I never really got that. And to me, those scenes came off as a little awkward when I originally watched this movie. It is one of the things where now, as I'm getting older, I'm like, well, it doesn't make me cringe like it used to. It's just, if I cringe, it was mostly because of how bad they were at it. But it's still, yeah. So that's one thing they're trying to do. Meanwhile, like I say, you got at one point, Jim gets the bright idea that there's only one person that really knows how good I am, and they're like, oh yeah, where's she this summer? And that's where we visit band camp. And Jim runs into this random boy who starts talking in the exact same inflection that Michelle always did. And he's like, oh yeah, you must know Michelle. And then of course he runs into her. And I posted a couple little fun little moments. Like he first sees her in the woods playing her flute. And then he rounds the corner and sees a bencher full of girls playing flutes. And of course, as we remember from the first movie, we know where Jim's mind goes immediately.
Yeah.
And he does say, that's a lot of flutes. And then, of course, she sees him and gets kind of like, oh, you can't be here. You can't. And then she gets the hot idea to put him in a uniform, a camper uniform, which ends up leading to awkward moments. This is probably one of the parts that hasn't aged as well.
It's still relatively funny, though.
It's relatively funny. They could have gone a lot worse with this, but basically Jim gets mistaken for a trombone player from Tall Oaks North, which, of course, is the special needs version. The special needs version of the band camp, yes. And he gets mistaken. And we see Petey briefly. He's actually pretty good, apparently. Yeah. But Jim, not so much.
I don't know why, but I'm reminded of the scene in Naked Gun where Leslie Nielsen basically takes the place of Pavarotti and sings the national anthem. Except we don't have to worry about the kid looking on as he realizes that his name is being butchered on the stage, like Pavarotti, when it shows him singing horribly and it puts Pavarotti's name under it, and Pavarotti's looking like,
right.
I don't know why, but I look at that and I think of that scene.
Right. But yeah, that they basically they do have that initial thing where we were talking about reactions and the way, one of the reasons I do like this series is that for the most part, they really are, you believe most of them. Like the chemistry they have as friends really does work, and they react really well to each other, I think. But there's the part where first part when he's first talking to Michelle, she immediately tries to launch into one of those Bandcamp stories, and she's like, "This one time, here." Yeah, but she had a great reaction when he asked her. Oh yeah, here we go. Where he's like, "Was I any good that night?" And she's like, "Geez, how could I forget? You sucked. You didn't know what the hell you were doing, but wasn't it fun? Even though you're so terrible." And then she's like, "I've had worse." It's like, oh man, I know that just shot his confidence all to hell. But like he had.
This is where 90% of the, I mean, out of the little mini stories, his story was the one that took up the most space in this.
Yeah.
But I guess it made sense because he's having to go back and forth. He's having to talk with her. He's having to talk with Nadia.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of back and forth, whereas the others are like literally small conversations and speaking on the phone.
and again, Oz had an entire plot line that was filmed and cut. So apparently he spent most of the movie moping around and occasionally doing stuff that just pissed people off by, like cheating. Instead, they played with him. He was a little insecure, but not, as bad. But yeah, since Heather's in Europe, there wasn't a lot of opportunity for her to have a lot of screen time. They just cut down a little bit on, the overall screen time. And Finch was always kind of the fades in and out. Nothing really revolves around him. He just does his thing. I'm kind of glad they didn't spend more time on Kevin and Vicky, honestly. But
well, that was the most cringe of the whole.
Yeah,
for me. That was. But maybe it's because I have had that situation. Maybe it's where you get. But that just felt overly cringe to me. I was kind of glad that they were more concentrated on Jim and he doesn't remind me as much of Adam Sandler as he does Woody Allen. Even in these films, he reminds me more of Woody Allen than.
Oh yeah, I agree with you. I think I can see the Sandler comparison, but it's not like I wouldn't say it's a strong. Visually, he looks a lot more like Sandler than Allen. That's for sure. But so at any rate, we also have. We are seeing a little bit of advancement with of course Kevin and Vicky, I kind of touched on this before where they talked about how many people they've been with. He claimed he'd been with 3 girls. She claimed she'd been with 1 guy. And that's where, Stifler and Jessica step in to talk about the rule of 3, which of course this kind of movie, you got to have some sort of like a rule that people talk about and abide by, and I don't know, Brandon, you're in a field that deals with human behavior. Do you think there's much to this rule?
I mean, I understand the basis behind it, but it is bullshit. I mean, because, the idea being that guys will tend to brag about being with a lot more women than they are.
Right.
And girls don't want to be seen as being slutty, so they don't want to brag about being with as many guys as they are.
Right.
But I don't think that applies as much these days as it did back then. And even then, I wouldn't say it applied that much.
Yeah, I mean, Jessica straight says it's an exact science, and I'm like, inexact at best. But especially because she, right before that, she says if he says 3, he's been with 1 girl or none. And I'm like, well, if it's an exact science, how is it 1 or none? It's like, doesn't quite work that way, does it?
She could actually have said basically, well, it's 0, and then it would have been an exact science because it was 0.
Right. And honestly, with Kevin's character traits, it would have been very unlikely that there would have been more. But And that also apparently was something that they changed from the original. He apparently got much more in a funk than he did in the final movie. So again, I think most of the cuts they made were good. I think most of the changes they made were good. Having seen the scenes of Stifler's dad, I am a little disappointed that they totally cut that. But I see how it wasn't needed narratively.
Well, it's better having his brother in there because
Yeah.
in a way it attaches if you really want to go further and watch the other spinoffs,
Right.
because a lot of them follow his brother.
Ah, okay. Makes sense. But yeah, it's interesting how that ended up playing out. But and it doesn't feel like a hack job. Like a lot of movies that the studio gets in and gets involved, it feels like it. Suicide Squad. But not always. And so it's like, okay, they could have done worse. They could have done a lot worse.
We need the butthole cut of Suicide Squad.
The what?
We need the butthole cut of Suicide Squad.
We still need the butthole cut of Cats the Musical first before we do that.
Indeed. I'm surprised they haven't clamored for a butthole cut of these movies.
I'm sure there is one.
Anyway,
They need an apple pie version of American Pie.
So I think somewhere in this, we've got a couple of big set pieces that come in. One is the one where Jim goes back to band camp and meets Michelle in the evening, and she gives him this interesting thing where she's basically telling him, look, your biggest issue is you're too uptight. Like, just tells him straight up, you need to loosen up. You need to be able to take any situation. And then she just yanks his pants down and says, now see this is a fucked up situation.
Yes. There'd be blood on that thing.
Well, that was what came next. She's like, I'm going to push your threshold a little bit. And she sticks a trumpet right up his ass. But then this other guy comes out, the other counselor that's been hovering around, picks up the trumpet and starts blowing. That was, one of the, you knew there was going to be a joke like that following.
And then he smells it, and then he's like, "Yeah."
That's the pretzel moment.
Yeah.
But come on now. It's a gross thing in general. I'm not a band geek by any way, shape, or form. But even I know the amount of spit that goes into those things.
Yeah.
That is gross, taking up somebody else's instrument and just playing it like that.
Well, yeah. Like, I mean, even in a less extreme example, one of a show I enjoy very much is Monk. And of course, Monk is very germophobic, like beyond the normal. But even I felt his pain. One of my favorite episodes is Mr. Monk Meets the Redheaded Stranger. And that's the one where he gets to meet his idol, Willie Nelson. He adores Willie Nelson. And he gets to jam with Willie, or he almost does. He apparently plays the clarinet. And the band member, not knowing what he was about to do, wet the reed for Monk. And Monk just stood there paralyzed, just heartbroken that he couldn't join in. And I'm like, it's a great moment in the series, a great episode in the series, but that was a much less extreme example than someone picking up an instrument that's been there. But even then, I felt his pain because I'm like, I wouldn't want to play a clarinet that someone just licked the reed. I wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah.
And it's like, now, of course, imagine the kind of cleaning they would have to do to that instrument
Like you guys are much more comfortable with each other than we are here.
But it is further evidence that Michelle is actually a kinky little freak. But at the so there's that. But then there's also the scene at the house that they're painting, the so-called lesbian scene, where the Stifler breaks in. He decides he takes it upon himself to break into their house and find evidence. So, of course, Jim and Finch go after him. And this whole thing bothered me when I was younger. One, I don't know why. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't tell you. But one of the things that has always wigged me out, and it's much less than it used to be. When this movie came out, it was much more of a thing for me than it is now. But it still don't get the feeling that I don't support it. It just doesn't bother me to the degree. But I get wigged out by people violating other people's space. Like if someone breaks into someone else's house, especially to look for evidence of their sexual proclivities, to me, that is crossing a line above and beyond the laws you're breaking. You know what I mean? And I felt that really strongly when this movie came out. I felt like Stifler was really going beyond the pale there. But also, the way it plays out, you got to suspend your disbelief a little.
Well, I think that this, much like the, of course, this was the going over and beyond the original, broadcasting over the internet. So
yes,
basically
exactly.
This is that version.
Yeah.
But I will say that even though they're highly inappropriate, at least the movie, and it does let you know that yes, it is inappropriate, and no, these people are not going to get away unpunished,
right,
for it. And one could say that it was kind of homophobic, but at the same time, when you've got somebody who is as kind of out there as Stifler, it actually works as the perfect punishment for him.
Yes, it does. And I will say, though, one of the biggest flaws in the movie is that just like Jim ultimately turns it around with Nadia and isn't punished fully by her, just by nearly everyone else he knows. Like in this movie, we see that. They go to that party and he's like, so are we the cool college kids or are we the creepy older people? Or one of them says it. And Jim turns to a couple of girls and they're like, oh, you're the guy that blew his load on the internet twice. So it's obvious that he is going to live with that for some time. So he doesn't fully get away, but
the Stifler thing at the end, where that I think was not appropriate. They should have had Stifler's brother be with them at the end or something.
That would have been inappropriate in a different way, but still, it would have been punishment for Stifler, which is nice. But so basically, they are of course caught because their stealth is not entirely their forte, and they are put through their paces. The girls are about to call the cops, which is the perfectly logical explanation. And that's where Stifler just says the most dumbass thing he could say. I just want to prove you chicks are really lesbians, which turns out to be the right thing to say because they realized, wait a minute, these guys they're just morons. Let's play with them. And so they decide to play with them, and that's where they have Stifler grab Finch's ass, which he's fine with. Stifler's not. And then they have, and now I want you to kiss, or now we want kisses, I think is what they said. And Jim's like, okay, and she's like, no, you kiss him. And Stifler's like, dude, no. But then, yeah, that's where they do the quick peck on the cheek and they immediately start spitting and gagging. And they're like, that's not a kiss. That's how you kiss your mother. And Stifler's like, don't you say a thing.
I do think it's funny. Jim's like, you were trying?
well, that's where the second part comes in. And that was like, I think Jim raising his hand was unscripted as well, but it was perfectly in character and hilarious that like, so they're kissing. He raises his hand like he's going to caress Stifler. Stifler bats his hand down. And then when they're done, Stifler's immediate reaction, dude, you're a lousy kisser. Jim's like, I wasn't trying. Wait, you were trying? Well, then, of course, Finch calms him down. He's like, ladies, as you were. So they end up having this give and take until they go too far, where the girls tell them, we need some. I think she asked for them to give each other hand jobs. I think that's what it was.
Yeah.
And then they were like, no, we're done.
Stifler's ready to take one for the team.
Yeah, he's ready to take one for the team. But the others are like, no, you put that thing away. So, yeah, that scene, what's up?
And the whole time you can hear, people can hear over that radio thing.
Yes.
And that was they're going, he's totally getting into it. The mother's like, look what you bought for our boys now. And then you see him listening again, and she's like, come and eat. And he goes, I'm not hungry, because he's already getting into this.
We got this family whose kids have these little radios. We got it broadcasting over the loudspeaker at a fast food restaurant. We've got a dispatch officer has picked it up at the police department. We've got a trucker.
And I actually don't think that's the police department. I do believe it is a trooper, a state trooper.
You think it? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, law enforcement,
Mounties.
basically.
And it's basically just, again, it's a callback to the original joke of, them broadcasting wide over the internet instead of on the closed private server. I
do have to say that internet thing was much more believable than all these people getting such great reception from these really cruddy radios.
I was going, Kim, what kind of things did they buy?
I'm really not so sure that's how those radios work, but it did make for a fun joke. So that whole sequence, it has moments that really, really, really strain credulity, but it also had some really great little mini moments, I think. And there was one other thing. Oh, yeah, we didn't talk about their first attempt at a party at the lake. So we had Sherman, of course, shows up because reasons. All their friends will show up. They don't really say how far away they are, but I'm guessing is maybe like a half hour or something. Does that sound about right? Because all these people showing up, they wouldn't have gone all the way across the state. They would, but
it's like everybody vacations at that lake during the summer, apparently.
But it's like, but when do you listen to the Shermanator? Oh, since he made me realize there's an abundance of wiener here. It's like they didn't, it's like hardly any like Vicky and Jessica are there, and they don't really count. So that's when Stifler and Oz go fishing, if you will. And then we find out the magic of the truism that if you're not looking, they will find you, I guess you could say. Like, Oz has a girlfriend. He's not interested. He's not trying to be smooth. And he turns out to be exactly the bait they needed to turn the party around. So it's like...
Kim had said that that's actually a common thing that guys did in college, which would be take the guy that's the hottest of the group and use that guy to reel in the other women.
Well, obviously.
So, yeah.
But although, as we saw in the first movie, when he's actually trying, it doesn't always go so well. So
suck me, beautiful.
Yeah. So at any rate, I guess that gets us pretty well into it. Does anyone have any stuff they want to pause and look at that we haven't hit already? I know we're doing.
I just get a kick out of it. I just get a kick out of the scene where, you know, I want full palm to butt clap or whatever she says.
Right. Yeah.
I do
For
like
some reason,
early,
I get a kick out of that whole scene.
Right.
I do like how earlier on they do choreograph a lot of stuff so that you can see it coming there. Like Jim breaks the lamp earlier on and repairs it with super glue, which does come back a little bit later. Not much later either, because after that scene is when Stifler comes in with the lube and the porno tapes.
When Santa porn comes giving them, bearing gifts, yes. Because the assault on Stifler's manhood cannot stand. He needs to prove to everyone. So he buys, which you gotta wonder, he probably spent a pretty penny on that stuff. We established before that Stifler is fairly loaded, but God knows how much he actually spent on that.
Now, those things are about $30 a tape back then.
Yeah.
So. I know this because my father liked to buy lots of them. and would talk about how much they cost, like it was like this thing to admire.
Well, like we do with some of the collections we buy. But at any rate, what's that?
I said right.
All right. Sorry. I'm going to have times later on where my voice gets a little rough, so I'll let y'all know if someone needs to step in. But meanwhile, we had. I'm trying to think where we're up to right now, because we did get a call. Stifler took a call where Finch immediately assumed he was talking to his mother and that she would be coming to visit by the end of summer. We find out at the end that probably was the call he was listening to, but it's a bait and switch, because eventually his brother shows up at the door and comes in. Basically, he's a mini Stifler. And we've also...
Junior,
yes. You could, well, in a sense. Honestly, yes, we have that very important scene Brandon just alluded to, where Jim had broken the lamp while I guess he was trying to do Tai Chi or something.
Yeah.
I don't really know. And he ended up getting very frustrated about I'm trying to remember why he went to sleep and immediately needed to get up and watch porn, but he did. And it was just he being Jim, not being the sharpest tool in the shed, he had both tubes, the crazy glue and the lube, just sitting on his nightstand, and blindly grabbed one and started using it. As you do. And needless to say, it leads to awkwardness. Extreme awkwardness. A reprise of the pie scene, but in much more public fashion.
I love that he grabbed that with the free hand. He ended up grabbing the porno tape.
Yeah, because that makes sense, right?
Yes.
He didn't want anyone to see what he was up to, and it's like, dude, sometimes you need to quit while you're ahead.
Oh, and the way the neighbors spotted him and caught the police.
Yes, the neighbor saw him
Just
skulking
slightly
about,
reminded,
and the
slightly reminded moment in There's Something About Mary, where
yes.
where what's his name zipped his wiener up in the zipper.
And we didn't really talk about that last week, but I have every reason to believe that the Farrelly brothers, and particularly There's Something About Mary, were influential on these movies. I think that is very probably the case.
Shoot, There's Something About Mary is one of the few Farrelly brothers movies that was actually good.
Yeah, it was pretty good, but it definitely had some raunchy humor.
It's still the Farrelly brother.
Well, yeah. No question there. So he ends up having to go to the hospital. And as I mentioned in our notes, the EMT is actually played by Shannon Elizabeth's boyfriend and now husband. And it was sort of a kind of payback a little bit for his being so cool with everything the first movie. They're being so cool about everything. But he does get a nice little moment where he has to keep Stifler from hopping into the ambulance. And he's like, "Are you family?" He's like, "No, this is just too good to miss." And then he gives, Jim a big thumbs up as they're getting ready to drive off. It's like, and then he walks away like, "Man, I'm so glad we came out."
And I love how Shipbreaker is trying to be like, it happens to the best of us. And I'm like, no, it doesn't.
Yeah, they look at him like, really? Yeah. And then, of course, his dad's there to meet him. And this is one part where his dad, again, he's like the most supportive dad ever, but he actually takes it almost to the extreme, telling off this old woman who's offended by Jim's choice of viewing material. And of course, Jim is cringing in shame at his father's diatribe, but
yelling it to everybody in the emergency room.
Exactly. But again, it shows that his dad is always got his best interests at heart, even if he's awkward about showing it.
It just seems like all of well, there's a few weird things with Stifler, but it seems like all of the really weird and nasty stuff that happens to poor Jim. It's just
Jim is the whipping post of the series for at least the first couple movies.
Yeah, obviously he's just and I feel sorry for the kid. He's just because he's a good kid. He really is a good kid.
Yeah.
It's just like if something weird is going to happen, it's going to happen to him.
Or at least if something that kind of baffles the mind a little bit. Like, again, I guess it was an honest mistake, but I sincerely hope this is not something that has happened to very many people in life. And I have to admit, I do cringe at those scenes because I feel I'm like, this would be painful on every level. Like, not just emotionally crippling, but oh my God, the physical pain. It's like, ugh. I do not envy
I'm
Jim.
not a guy, but I can imagine, hey, I've glued stuff already and got my fingers like stuck together, and it's like, oh man. And you're sitting there trying to get in. And I know how uncomfortable and nasty that felt, and it's like, I could not imagine what that would feel like on a guy,
Yeah. It's a sensitive area. And then, of course, Jim ends up in what's essentially a diaper, but like a gauze diaper. And the doctor tells him, you're going to need to rest. And he gives him a period of time. And Jim's like, oh man, the party. And his dad's like, he's got this party and he's going to see this young lady. And the doctor's like, I would advise your son to keep, his dick under wraps. And he's like, well, I will be saying, but should the pants decide to come off, and the doctor just thrusts something in his hands like, this should shave a couple days off, And then, of course, Jim's dad's like, this is good news. Jim, this is a good news day. And I'm like, wow, that's some silver lining. That's some hardcore silver lining. But of course it makes Jim upset because he has been waiting all summer to get with Nadia. And so he concocts a scheme with Michelle. Actually, she comes up with the idea. She's been helping him with his training. And she's like, we should pretend to be dating. And that way she won't expect you to hop into the sack sooner. Oh, no, she showed up, and that's when he went to her. Yeah. Right. She showed up, and he freaked out. What's that?
So that he could have an excuse not to try and do anything with her while his junk was kind of
right
in repair.
And she's like, and we'll break up on the day of the party. And it seems like foolproof thing. The only problem, and she's like, what was it she said? She's like, I know how to make a girl jealous. It's like, and she actually does a good job. Like, Nadia is actually jealous. And it's like kind of crazy.
Except for that horrible breakup speech that she does.
Oh my God, it was horrible. But Nadia apparently bought it.
Nadia wasn't the sharpest in this
one. Right. Well, and also, and we'll get to that.
Really wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed.
Yeah. We'll get to another aspect of that here in a bit. But so they do that. They have their plan. And the problem is they're actually spending time together, actually having fun together. And while it is an act for Nadia, it's more than really just an act. Like, Jim actually, the morning of, he finds out, oh, wow, I'm all better. He's like, we might actually have to go through with this. And you see that little bit of hope on Michelle's face. Like, yeah, okay, he's having second thoughts. Okay. And then they have that horrible breakup scene. And just honestly, I think it's a great moment where she walks out to her car and gets in her car, and you just see her crumple. Like, she is not happy about the outcome. And it was just like, because they actually did hit it off. So I like that whole sequence and the acting and everything. Maybe Nadia's acting was a little hit or miss, but otherwise. And then we get to the big party, and we have of course, Stifler's brother is trying to go around hitting on all the girls really shamelessly. And Stifler's like, man, you're just ruining my, you're ruining my mojo, basically. And he's like, you're on watch, you're on cop duty. He sends him outside to watch for the cops. You got Oz gets a great surprise because Heather showed up early. He was going to pick her up. She decided to show up early. So they have a nice little surprise. The more dynamic thing that I guess you might say would be what happens with Kevin and Vicky. Vicky shows up, introduces her date, and Kevin storms off being a dick, because you do. And then, of course, they all go and find him on the beach and talk him down and get him back to the party. And I think before that, though, was the whole thing with Jim, where he and Nadia go down on the beach. they go looking for, they see a lighthouse, and she's like, oh, it's so romantic. Let's go in the lighthouse. And so they do. And he finds himself ambivalent, surprisingly so. And then he tells her, he's like, don't take this the wrong way. You're everything I used to want. And she's like, you want the band geek? And he's like, that's where he's like, yeah, he has that kind of cheesy line. Nadia, I am a band geek. I just never joined the band. And he goes running off to Tall Hoax to get Michelle. And Nadia's like, you go get your geek. One day I will get mine. And he gets up to the band camp. He gets there. Michelle is getting ready to do her big solo. And she's very sad. You can tell she's very sad. She's getting ready to do this big solo. And he shows up as Petey with the trombone, interrupts her solo, but, she is touched. They have a moment. And the one guy who before said, hey, everyone, let's hear it for Petey, he comes up and does it again. And it's like, I actually was amused by that callback. And actually in that sequence earlier, there was one part where one of her fellow bandmates is like, he's special. And Michelle's like, he's my bitch. I did like that callback. But here, that one girl looks on like, oh, that's so sweet, And they go running off. She does a bow. They go running off. We see Kevin makes his peace with Vicky and Brett or whatever he pretty much had a tool name. I think it was Brett. And then this is the part that always rang super false for me when I was a kid. There's two parts that happened very quickly that always rang super, not a kid. This came out when I was in college, but you know what I mean. They rang false for me back in the day. One of them still does. And that's the one where Stifler's brother is on that radio and it's still going out really far. And the quote unquote lesbians pick up and he starts talking with them. And then we show them show up at the party. He escorts them in, one on each side. And Stifler's like, well, good luck there. You found lesbians. And the girl's like, we never said we were lesbians. And then, of course, Stifler just debases himself. And his brother's like, what the hell is going on here? But he just kind of fawns all over them. He tells his brother, you truly are a Stiffmeister. Grabs him, throws him into the party, and walks off with the girls. And it's like, that part kind of
before that, he proclaims that he will do anything for anybody in that room.
Right. Do anyone in that room. What do you say, man, woman, or otherwise, or something like that? That's when we see the monkey. I'm like, that was a great cut there, throwing the monkey in right then. And the monkey made like kind of a kissing motion too. It was like, but before that happens, that part I still think is pretty unrealistic. And as we said earlier, it kind of rewards Stifler in a way he probably shouldn't have been rewarded. So, and y'all can definitely weigh in on that if you have a different read, but I feel that at least.
Well, assholes at the end of the day still seem to end up with the ladies.
They do.
Unfortunately, it's kind of a thing in society too. Chicks love the bad boys.
Right. But not always. Sometimes guys are assholes and they still lose out. And that's where the other one factors in. And that is where we have this little moment where Nadia is hanging out at the bar, drinking her sorrows away, and Sherman is right next to her, and they're both bitching. They're both upset, and he's like, come on, Sherman, be the Shermanator, you know, mocking all these girls. And she's like, oh, I like the movie. And he's like, it's Nadia, don't. And he's like, you know, he's like, I know, I'm just a geek. And then she just suddenly looks at him, you are a geek. And then they go running upstairs. And that's the part where Stifler and Jessica happen to be standing next to each other. They both look up, both simultaneously go, no fucking way. And then they look at and that part where they looked at each other seriously, that kind of stretched my, you know, like I'm not sure either of them would have even had that moment. But where they both exclaimed the same thing at the same time, I fully bought that. But this is the part that I used to think was complete BS. I was like, there is no way Nadia ends up with Sherman, ever. But then I thought about it, and honestly, I did have a geek fetish, partly because of Michelle. It has dissipated over the years, but I was straight up, I had the hots for her for a couple of years, and partly because of this movie and Wedding. I also saw a few episodes of Buffy at the time, so Allison Hannigan generally, so I understand the geek fetish is a thing. And the older I get, the more I understand how if you do have a specific fetish, you sometimes will do things you never thought you would do. So I used to agree with them. I used to agree wholeheartedly. No effing way that would ever happen. And now I'm like, I buy it. I don't like it. I don't think Sherman should have gotten that lucky, but because he is an asshole at the end of the day. But, and I think Nadia could have done better. I mean,
he filled the need.
He filled the need at that moment. Yes. So that is one that I used to call BS on, but now I'm like, no, actually, I get it, you know, a little bit. Hey, Dustin.
Hi, sorry about the delay here.
We have almost finished the plot, but we can definitely, if you want, tell us, is this your first experience with American Pie 2? And what
no. So I actually saw this movie very shortly after it released.
Okay.
Actually, abnormally early after it released, because my dad had that VHS club thing where they would just like send you random stuff like popular movies.
Oh, like Columbia House or
yeah, this was actually one of the titles we got from that. Like it came with a like pile of random stuff. And this is the first American Pie movie I saw. And I was kind of starting to, well, I was becoming a teenager when this came out, and I didn't really have a whole lot of experience with what other people in my age group were like. So I kind of thought this was how normal people acted. So like it was still like funny enough that like I could watch it and it would keep my attention. But it also felt like my first kind of, well, I don't want to say adult movie because that sends the wrong message, but movie that wasn't like about like monsters or like a Star Wars film or like a sci-fi film, or I guess you could probably just kind of call it like my first like realistic like comedy movie that I saw. So it sort of gave me unrealistic expectations about what getting older was like.
right.
But at the same time, it was also just sort of a step towards, you know, learning about that kind of thing. So it was kind of important to me in that way. And it feels like it sort of reflects, well, I guess like a future that didn't happen, because this came out, very shortly, like after 9/11. Before 9/11, I think.
Shortly before, I believe.
Yeah, shortly before. So there was kind of a, like I was turning like 13, 14, and there was kind of a period there where it's like my interests were starting to shift from, well, nerd stuff to it's like, okay, I should learn how to drive, oh, I should learn how to talk to people, I should, make myself, spend time around people, like even if it makes me uncomfortable. There was sort of that period of growth that people get in adolescence. And, and then when 9/11 happens, my whole family is like flipping out, and, where instead of, okay, I'm going to learn to drive or I'm going to get out of the house more, it's inside, like stay inside and be afraid, at least was the way my mom kind of took that whole thing. Like we would go to church extra sessions or sermons like quite a lot after that. And it's just with the timing of this movie, it felt like, I don't know, it felt like if sort of like the Clinton 90s had continued on, like this was just the kind of, it's like, oh yeah, everybody's, people are awkward, but everybody's growing and maturing, and line goes up forever. So it has sort of a very difficult to describe feeling of that to me. And a lot of that stuff that I had been, it's like, oh yeah, it's you becoming a teenager and getting out there and taking life steps. Instead, that just kind of didn't happen because there was very much that be afraid mindset after the disaster. So it just sort of feels like a future that wasn't allowed to happen, or at least indicative of that. So I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody but me. But,
well, I mean, you do have a good...
It was kind of an important movie to me for some of those reasons. So, and when I did like go to public school and try doing that, later, some of the friends I met kind of did remind me of these guys.
Yeah.
Just a little bit. Like they weren't creeps, in the same ways. Well, they weren't creeps at all, but like they just seemed like normal people, like some of our more stable characters in this series do.
Right.
So, and yeah, I really love this movie and I always kind of advocate for it. So I don't really have a whole lot to say about the plot because the plot is more or less there to connect like bits and skits. Because this does have some really funny scenes in it. I was rewatching earlier, even though I've probably seen this movie 40 something times over the years. And important to note also, when we did get that VHS tape, my room did not have cable, so whatever was on TV would be just whatever VHS tapes I would have. And I would end up watching this kind of a lot. Just because it was one of like 20 things that I had access to, and I hated not having something on the screen. But yeah, like the well, when I fell asleep, sorry everyone, rewatching it for our show, we were at the radio scene where Stifler breaks into the house and they find quote unquote lesbian artifacts. I particularly enjoy how he calls it an artifact. So, and that's, I mean, in Ebert's review, he said, oh, that's this movie's version of, the internet joke in the first one. Like, it's pretty much the same. And it's like, well, no, it is not the same. This is probably faintly more legal. And I emphasize the term faintly. But it does play much funnier with all like the guys like chiming in.
So
I don't know if we talked about that. Well, we must have. But
well, on that note, what is your thought about the basic idea? As I said, well, I think we've all kind of expressed a variation on the theme that this movie tries really hard and at times one might almost say too hard to hit the main comedic beats that the first one did. For many years, I considered this a pale imitation of the first movie, but I have changed my viewpoint a little bit, and especially on this viewing. But like, what's your thought on that? Do you feel like they spent too much time trying to hit the same beats, or do you feel like this one really stands on its own story-wise? Or
I think this one stands on its own fine, because the big scenes that it's trying to, I guess you would say, copy. It's more like maybe it uses them more as like it's an outline. It's like, oh, something really embarrassing is going to happen in the gym. Like that, the smooth criminal scene is. It never doesn't make me laugh. Like I didn't have the same thing happen to me, but I did. I was in an accident that required like going to the hospital for like that kind of thing, and I was thinking of that a lot during the emergency room visit. So the scene kind of means something a little different now, but at the same time, it's just like, oh, why didn't he look? Oh, why didn't? Right. So it's so much wackier than anything in the first movie. I mean, I don't know how you could really even compare it.
Right.
I mean, the radio scene, yes, that's derivative of this weird thing suddenly becomes public, and I guess that's kind of what happens in the smooth criminal scene too with the glue, but it's not like being broadcast anywhere,
Right.
So I think maybe Ebert's review pointed that out too, because I used to read that in his movie review book too.
Right.
I would just reread reviews of movies that I had laying around, and I think he actually liked this one, even though he may have had some of those complaints. So,
My recollection is that he generally was kinder to this series than he might have been, than a lot of the critics were. But I could be remembering that wrong. But
I remember one line. It's like, and then we have Jim's dad, the world's most understanding and supportive parent, telling his son that he's proud of him after the most embarrassing, horrible moment of his life. And yes, this is the kid who had sex on the internet.
Yes. So you mentioned the use. I will get to music when we later on, but I do want to mention that scene with Jim superglues himself to himself. They are playing the Alien Ant Farm version of Smooth Criminal, which, again, we talked in the last movie about how the soundtrack really, really helps make these time capsule movies, like, just in an insane way.
I mean, that song was so damn popular at the time.
Yes.
Like, that was, when you think 2001, like, you think Alien Ant Farm Smooth Criminal. Like, I had just started listening to music, and it was one of the few songs, like, actual songs that I had heard before I saw this movie.
Right.
And we're talking maybe like 6 or 7 things from like an evening or two of MTV back when they still had videos.
Right. And it is interesting because that is a cover. It's one of the covers that is probably one of the better known and better liked covers out there. But there are a lot of people who would argue that it is little more than a pale retread of the Michael Jackson version. There's like, it is different. It is its own thing, but it also is close enough that you'll get people arguing back and forth. So it's kind of fitting that they picked a cover like that for a movie like this at that crucial moment in this movie. And just the idea of a song called Smooth Criminal playing right then, I'm amused by it.
I think I like fell out of my chair, like fell off of the bed the very first time I heard them do that. Every once in a while, something like catches me that off guard that I'll just kind of like flop over, like a bad anime character, which pretty much never happens anymore. But every once in a while.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was very I mean, that's what everybody in like the age group that would have been really into this would have been listening to at the time. So, I mean, I didn't even know Michael Jackson did that song until probably 2014. Like, I did not know that it was actually a Michael Jackson thing. And so I listened to the original Smooth Criminal after that. And, well, I don't remember anything about like how Michael Jackson sings it. Let's put it that way. It was, people might get mad at me for saying that the Alien Ant Farm version is like definitely better, but I would say it's definitely better.
Right. The I keep wanting to do one of these days. I'd like to do a video talking about covers that are as good as or better than the original, but I don't know if that'll happen.
It had a really fun music video too.
Yeah, I think I've seen that one. It was just like
yeah. It was like the band, they were like playing in a wrestling ring, like in somebody's like suburban yard, and there's like just like a party around them, and then there's all kinds of weird stuff going on, like people are doing like skate tricks, and it's very weird, but it's also very 2001 like block party.
Right. I can believe that.
I want to see that again now, actually. So, I can remember it pretty well.
So was there really much else? Let's see. As far as the plot itself, we're up to the big party.
Was there a stinger? I don't remember.
Well, the day after the party, of course, or was it the day after? Yeah, they're all packing up, getting ready to go.
Yeah.
And Stifler's inside the house. Everyone else is outside. And the car pulls up, really fancy car, pulls up. And, Finch goes and talks to the person inside. And, that's where he is properly introduced to Stifler's mom. And he tells her, I've realized I can't spend my whole life pining over one woman and all this stuff, telling her how much he's grown. And she's like, well, I'm glad to hear that, Finchy. You want to get it on? And he's like, you better clear your calendar. and they're like, what about dog years? And he's like, give me 3 days. and they go off, and then Stifler's like, who was that? Oh, it was a wrong.
They each give like a different like lie, and it's like, who the fuck was it?
Well, no. First he's like, oh, someone got lost looking for the lake. And he's like, what a dumbass! The lake's right there. And then yes, they all give a different lie, and he's like, wait a minute, who was in that car? And then we see the car rocking, and we hear Mrs. Robinson again. Yeah, of course. And
that whole thing, like, Janine, call me Stifler's mom.
Stifler's mom.
Like,
yeah, that's
which, I know it does sort of undermine. So one thing that's nice about these like first 4 movies is that you see like a life stage progression for our characters,
right? And
everybody else is kind of already where Jim ends up at the end of the movie. Like it seems like a lot of them are just happy with who they are now, or like they've got like their girlfriend stuff figured out. Or Jim is kind of more the main character of this one than in the first one, I think.
Yeah.
And like that whole, it's like, oh, I like figuring out that he actually cares more about Michelle than he does like Nadia. Like I thought that was like a good character growth moment for him, where he sort of just accepts how compatible they are.
Yeah. I think that this one is a good transitionary point. I do think that I don't think it was necessarily 100% necessary, but at the same time, it does offer us a good transition point that leads us into the last 2 films.
Right.
Without it, it would be much more difficult to throw things in. So it bridges a lot of gaps, I think.
And someone did say earlier that they wish there was a college movie in the series, and this is the closest we get to an actual college American Pie movie.
No, I was gonna say this is their college. This is like their college summer, where it's like you have some things figured out, like you're not, just a dumb high schooler anymore.
Right.
But you're still learning other lessons too, or you're trying to get those lessons nailed down into habits. Because I mean, when you're in college, you do try to go do stuff like this during the summers, and a lot of times it's with the people you meet at the college. But if you had high school friends, I mean, this is when you're still in contact with them.
Yeah.
And I think it actually does a pretty good job of being a college movie, even though they're not at the college specifically the whole time. Except for that first scene, which, dear Lord, that was rough.
Yes, it was.
I remember my first year after college. Actually, it was similar to that in a lot of ways, because we actually did do that. We actually went to the house that I'm in right now, because it was my grandparents' house back in the day. Me and all of my high school friends that I played D&D with, and we had probably one of the nerdiest versions of this for a number of weeks during the summer. So we kind of had a version of that, but much less, much nerdier. Right?
Mine was kind of different. Like a couple of my friends, like they did move in, like to get summer jobs, but they did it in the Wisconsin Dells, and there was some good reason I didn't go, even though I was like invited, and I probably should have gone, but I can't remember what it was. There was something that made it like not viable to go do that, but I feel like those were like good connections that I could have made.
Yeah.
So, I knew people who did that, and some of my friends, like when they came back from college, like they were doing that. They would do that like with their own like either new or pre-existing friend groups that I was not as involved in. So quite a few people I knew actually did something similar to this. Not exactly like beach house hanging out, but this was like a common thing. So that's why to me it reads perfectly fine as a college movie.
I think a lot of my friends probably did too, but unfortunately, I didn't really get to do much of that. I know we did some catching up stuff afterwards, but yeah. But yeah, for me, the movie is more a reminder of things I kind of wish I could have done, but a lot of it still rings true, So yeah, that pretty much. Yeah. That pretty much covers it. Does anyone have more that they want to throw in on the plot, or are we ready to move on to production?
Oh, let's get this production game over with.
Okay. So obviously they had a little more money to work with this time because the first movie was such a big success. Enough that, again, they filmed and scrapped 2 entire plot lines. So there is definitely a lot of existing footage out there that is not in the final cut. So
I do remember some lines from the radio sequence that like the trucker has that I remember seeing in some of the deleted materials.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure there were quite a few moments in that sequence that were cut from the from the rest of it. And I vaguely remember the rated version. I think I've probably mostly seen the unrated versions. But I think the scene in the hospital, y'all can tell me if I'm wrong about this. I think a lot of that was cut from the original. I'm pretty sure. But much of it still made it in. In the unrated version, I think it's much longer. If I'm remembering correctly.
I think the unrated, is it the unrated, the one that has like the thing with like the old lady? Couldn't you leave that disgusting thing at home?
That's what I'm thinking.
Ma'am, it is super glued to his body. So shut the fuck up.
I think that was cut from the theatrical version, but I could be remembering them wrong.
It is like an extra couple of minutes, like in the runtime, and it's kind of more. You're uncomfortable enough, you know. You don't need to really twist the knife like the way that scene does.
Right.
It's like, thank you, I hadn't noticed, you know.
So
it was a cool beach house location.
Yeah. Locations, I think, were pretty good in this one. I think they did a good job with the. I guess the beach house was the main set that they needed, right? That was probably the main thing.
Yeah, I guess it's in Michigan too. So
yeah,
which it looked. I mean, I know it gets warm there in the summer, but it looked a little not like Michigan. Like somebody said Michigan.
Yeah,
and that's the only way I could tell. Like it looked like a pretty nice beach house.
Well, and actually, I was about to ask you guys who are from up around the Great Lakes if y'all felt like this felt Michigan-y. Dave, what's your thought on that?
No, just maybe Bradford Beach area, just a little bit, but not too much. I feel like the oceans are more like that scenery. The ocean be like either the Pacific or the Atlantic on either side.
It felt like a California beach.
I would not compare this to the ocean at all. Like I said, it's not too far from the Chesapeake, I think.
I've been on Shawano Lake up in northern Wisconsin, and that's more. That's not really this kind of beach. This feels like ocean beach. This does not feel like lake beach.
Yeah, it seems like the house is kind of close to the sand. I used to live on Lake Superior, and the beach houses there, at least the ones I saw, they were usually significantly far, like up, away from the sand line. There was one time I got paid to help somebody move some stuff out of kind of one of those like lakeside mansions, and from the row of houses that I saw in that area, it seems like at least the Wisconsin lake house kind of stuff is like further away from the water, kind of up on a hill overlooking the beach. And I wonder if that maybe would have to do with at least Superior being kind of a nasty storm sort of lake, so where like you don't want to be near the sand, which I guess would apply to how beach houses should be built. But this one does look a little close to the actual beach.
And
like there was like a sudden like surge of some kind. It feels like you'd get hit.
Dave, what was the place you mentioned?
I've been up on Shawano Lake. I've been up on Lake Arrowhead.
Right.
I've been to lake type beaches.
Well,
and lake type beaches are off. Oh, I said Shawano.
Well, you said something shores, didn't you? Did I make that up?
See,
you might have.
The reason
that there's a difference.
See, I've been to Lake Winnebago.
Because the reason I'm wondering is, again, maybe I just made something up. I don't know. But I do know, again, Adam Hers was from Grand Rapids, and a lot of this series is based loosely on Grand Rapids. And Grand Rapids is about almost due east, not quite due east, but it's really close. You got due west of it is Port Sheldon, and just a bit north of that is Norton Shores.
Does this say that it was filmed in Grand Rapids, though?
Well, I'm sure a lot of it, more or less. Let me see if I can find that. But my point being that that's probably what they had as sort of visual concepts. Like, well, no, they filmed most of it. Filmed most of it in California, actually.
See, to me, the Great Lakes are so much of a mystery that I don't really know what the beaches of the Great Lakes look like.
The
So
beaches of the Great Lakes. The beaches of the Great Lakes are definitely not as sandy as you see in most of these beach type scenes.
Right.
Like
good amount of dirt in there.
The beaches on Baywatch are definitely like near the ocean, and that's the kind of beach that they were filming in.
Well, Grand Park has a lot of beach though.
Well, our beaches here in Wisconsin, at least all the ones I've been on, especially up far north, like it's all kind of like woodland brush kind of adjacent. So I mean, you'll get a lot of like if you run your hand through the sand, you'll get a lot of like twigs and stuff in there.
And oftentimes
it did look kind of clean to me.
But Grand Park is very beachy.
Not as beachy as you see in like here.
Even when they clean it up, there's still like stuff in it.
So
I mean, with and our beaches are also like really kind of like short. There's like maybe like 10 to 15 feet from the water to the end of the sand.
Right.
I mean, I'm still going off of a lot of that Lake Superior memory. Like there was this little beach, like the biggest beach in the town I was in. It was maybe 20 feet. I want to say like at most from the water to where the sand ended and like a parking lot began.
The beach that
I remember there was a storm. There was a storm in Superior once, and I had never seen how the water moves in like a Great Lakes, beach or whatever. And the water was all the way up to the road. Like the sand was completely submerged. So I feel like that house would not be safe if it was really in Michigan. I mean, maybe Michigan is nicer than Lake Superior, so that could be a part of it too. But
the beach that we saw in Cleveland definitely had a lot of sand, but it was not. You're right. It wasn't as picturesque as this one.
And a lot of rocks.
Yeah, there were a lot of rocks. There were a lot of jetties, a lot of zebra mussels living on the jetties. It's very annoying.
A lot of the lakes that I've been to have a lot of fishing piers around them.
Right.
And the sand is more of a seaweedy sand. That in the warmer weathers, it would feel like beach sand, but in the cooler weather, it definitely would be a little bit more seaweedy on the bottom of your feet.
Looking at a few of these Great Lakes beaches pictures I'm looking at, I could see that beach being one of them. But again, I guess it just depends on where you're at,
Right. Well, it definitely does. That's a lot of area to cover, but but anyway, that was a surprisingly large detour there.
Right.
Did we have anything else on production before we move to music?
Well, it's kind of like the first one where they don't really have any like wild special effects.
Right.
It's just all in those locations.
Right. There's a little bit of makeup, a little bit of props, a little bit of that kind of stuff. There
is one pie, which I guess would be production related, but it's kind of in a blink and you'll miss it sort of moment.
Yeah.
Yep. Drop at the beginning.
Yeah, Ebert made the joke, the pie seems absent this time. And because the one I was reading was in a book, like there was like an addendum that he added for the book. It's like, I was later informed that the film does indeed contain one pie, though not for the same purpose.
Now, of course, we were talking before about the ubiquity of Alien Ant Farm's Smooth Criminal, but looking through this set list, we got Weezer's Hash Pipe, we got In Too Deep by Sum 41, we got Every Time I Look for You, Blink 182. There are a handful of these.
182. I knew I heard Blink 182 in there.
Right. I'm just saying there are a handful of really. They were everywhere. There were a handful of songs that were everywhere at the time.
There is
there was a very brief time in my life that I actually gave a crap about music that was going on during the time. And it just so happened that it was during the time that these movies were coming out. So to me, this one and the first movie are just a set list of songs and stuff I tended to listen to at the time.
Right.
So it's remarkably nostalgic and pleasant for me to listen to. And it's kind of sad too, but you know,
Right.
as it gets as you get
This
older.
is when music was better.
Well, there was
better by my estimate, but not better by younger people's estimate, probably.
Well, there was the podcast I talk about sometimes, Chapo Trap House. There was one episode they did with a friend of theirs who's like a music expert that was about like Woodstock '99, and it was just they talked about some of like the trends in music where it's like it felt like everything was kind of, you know, all the problems were solved and there was nowhere for stuff to go. Yep, the music of the time was like very angry, especially like with new metal. And it seemed like it kind of started to steer away from that a little bit, where we got some of this, you know, kind of, I don't know what to say, like alternative, like pop rock kind of stuff.
I mean, pop punk was the big thing in the late '90s, early 2000s. Pop punk was really was reborn in that time, where you basically had punk music where it was angry, but then it just became something like, you know, you had all those groups like Blink 182, Sum 41, which was kind of in the middle. You had Offspring, which was in the middle. You had
Offspring and Green Day are both on the soundtrack for this too. Yeah. You know, so there.
You know, it was all over the place, but a lot of it just did that catchiness. Goldfinger, which you know, we talk about something about Mary.
They were in the first American Pie, I believe.
So, you know, it was just a fun time because, you know, it was all that catchiness, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think anybody who was anybody at the time didn't know Superman from Goldfinger.
Maybe I didn't know who Goldfinger.
You mean Three Doors Down, or?
Well, yeah, because Superman was. Then again, if you weren't,
you're thinking Kryptonite.
No.
No,
goddamn.
Yeah, everyone knew Kryptonite.
You could not avoid that song, no matter how hard you tried. So,
you could not.
See, I was a Tony Hawk Pro Skater kid, so Goldfinger's Superman was always big into that.
Yeah.
That ska punk thing. Oh yeah, and ska was big into that time period too. Ska really made a resurgence during that time period.
Right.
Well, it was very much not something that fit the tone of this movie or this series. But Slipknot and Disturbed, like, were both like, coming out. Like, I think Down with the Sickness was really starting to hit in like 2001.
We should also
Anhedenia was also starting to hit in there too.
We should also mention background music by David Lawrence, but again, this one's really more about the found music than anything.
Oh yeah.
And they definitely played it very well, I think, for the most part.
I still say that whenever anybody asks, I always say that the Smooth Criminal usage in this is the greatest music drop of all time, because it is so perfectly timed and it fits so well with what's happening. Like, it is so funny. I mean, maybe No One Lives Forever in Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2 works a little bit better. Like, but it is so hard to like beat that, you know, criminal starting as soon as he realizes he's glued his hand to the tape.
That would also be a really good potential discussion, and I've got to figure out what would be the top of my list. But one that immediately comes to mind is Son of a Preacher Man in Pulp Fiction. I just absolutely love that needle drop. That's one of my favorites. There are a few that are really, really, really good. But yeah, the Smooth Criminal one here is actually really good. But anyway, so I guess it's time for favorites. So, let's say we'll just keep it simple this week. Favorite character, favorite scenes. And we'll start with you, Dave.
I would have to go with the smooth criminal moment that I will never forget that my life. I mean, he's holding his hand on top of that roof. The neighbor's looking at him and starting to mention her husband. Hey, Phil! You know.
And then when the cops tell him to raise his hands, he got to go, I'm glued.
Yeah, right.
He sounds so pathetic when he says it. Like it's oh man, it's so funny. I'm sorry.
And I'm not sure if you were on here earlier, but for some reason that whole scene kind of reminds me of that scene, and There's Something About Mary where dude gets his nuts zipped up in the zipper. I don't know if you've seen that movie, but it's
although I have not. I know about it, but I have not actually encountered it.
I actually saw that movie in the theater, believe it or not. So one of the few comedies or dramedies that I've actually seen in the actual theater. So
also an excellent soundtrack.
Yeah.
Music.
But favorite character, I'm gonna have to go with Michelle in this one.
Okay.
There's something just sexy about her sticking a trumpet up his butt.
Oh, Dave, we were talking about weirdly specific fetishes earlier. Okay. Brandon, how about you?
I would say my favorite scene, I don't know. There's a lot of those scenes. I mean, anyone could probably say the whole super glue scene. But I don't want to because I feel like that would be just overused. But I can't remember a lot of the other ones that just like really stick out to me. So I will just say the scene where he's playing the trombone for the first time, pretending to be Petey.
Okay.
And then as far as favorite character, yeah, I will go with Michelle as well. She was the MVP in this one, I think. That is my thought on it.
All right. How about you, Tammy?
Well, while I do like the super glue scene, I also kind of like the first scene because actually so I had something like that encounter back in high school.
Oh.
My boyfriend at the time, we were at his house and his mom walked in. And I was just sitting there petrified. And she's all blah 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 blah, and he's talking to her, and she goes, "Okay, kids," and she closes the door, and I'm just still sitting there like petrified. And he goes, "Oh, my mom's really cool," and I said, "Okay."
Right.
Like when we got dressed and went out there later, I felt like totally uncomfortable, and she's like, "Oh, come on, da 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 da." I'm like, "Oh wow, man." Just like, so I kind of like the first one because kind of been there, done that,
Right.
I think I'm gonna go with Jim this time because I feel so bad for the kid, he just keeps getting in situations. It's just,
Right. All right. All right. How about you, Dustin?
Well, I mean, the super glue scene, like, while it is like really funny, it's also a little too close to home for some of those like medical reasons. If somebody prescribes you something to help you sleep, and it lists that as a side effect, maybe be a little more aware of it. Let's just put it that way. So all those scenes where he is like, in the shower and, trying to, find other stuff that works, that was a little, So I'm going to go with the radio scene where, it's, will their radios pick us up? No, we're on the CB frequency, which is somehow used like at some restaurant, at the police station, by truckers, kids walkie-talkies. And I like how my favorite part of that is how even like the cops who should be like, we need to stop this, are like into it too. Like everybody is on board. They're even offering advice.
Well, and they even say, like, the guy at the dispatch officer is like, I'm going to turn this off now. And he turns it up instead.
Who wants me to touch Amber? I do. Who's that? This is, and he looks at the other cop. See, Bob, I'm turning off my radio now. And he turns the knob up, and the other cops are like, yeah, like thumbs up in him. I remember one of my friends at the time from Pokemon League, like his favorite joke in the whole movie was like the dad, like at the cookout, like trying to quote unquote fix the walkie-talkies. It's like, food's ready. I'm not hungry. That was his favorite line.
I like that too. And it reminds me of the scene in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, where Gus Van Sant is counting the money and Ben's like, a little direction here. And he's like, damn it, Ben, I said I'm busy. Just reminds me of that.
You know what the weirdest thing is about these little radios? Is I have this little transistor radio that I take to work with me. I work by the airport. And for some reason, the radio station that I like to listen to is got to be it only happens with this transistor radio, okay? I can be in the same area in my truck and have the same station on, and it doesn't do this. Only when I got the little radio on at work, I can hear the controllers at the airport through my little transistor radio. It's something about the frequency that they're on, only with that little radio. It's just weird.
So it's not necessarily all that impossible after all, but something like that could have happened, huh?
Okay.
Yeah, it's
probably
just weird.
not.
I mean, it's this movie made me think of that because it doesn't, like I said, that radio station is like one of the biggest radio. Dustin, you know KLH.
I think. I don't use radios.
But you know of the radio station I'm talking about.
I'm pretty sure I've actually been there once or twice. Yeah.
It's one of the biggest radio stations around here. So it's like, it's just so weird that it only happens with that little radio.
That is interesting.
And anyway, my other like thing that I always remember from that scene too is like when they're so grossed out, it's like, we want you to, palm grass, It's like, no, I can't do that. And then just the trucker, squeeze his ass, son. You'll like it. Because, I saw that when I was at the age where it's like, ew, that's really gross. And, then that line played, and I was like, oh, that's really not big of a deal. Huh. So that sort of changed my mind slightly at like 30.
If a chick's offering to do sexual favors to you and you're single and you're horny and all that jazz as a young adult, how much of that shit would you do?
Right.
I guess it depends on how bad you really wanted to do it.
All right. So, Dustin, did you say your favorite character, or did you?
I think my favorite character in this is maybe Oz, because everybody else is having these just ridiculous adventures, and Oz just seems to have himself together. It's like, yep, I'm with my girlfriend. I'm, content. I'm just hanging out with my buddies. Like he doesn't really have like a huge plot line like everybody else does.
Yeah, because they scrapped it.
Oh, well. That would explain that. Like,
yeah.
I think I remember hearing, was it something like he was more worried about like how they were just being off in the other country or what?
Yes, he spent the summer moping around, and the two of them ended up cheating on each other, and apparently it just did not test well. No one liked.
Nah, that would have been bad.
Yeah. So yeah, I agree with you. This was a better
feeling that they have a healthy relationship, and that's like kind of the one thing that maybe bugs him a little bit, but he ultimately trusts her.
Yeah. And it was nice.
Was the first one up on the ladder playing Peeping Tom to that whole thing, though.
It is nice, though, that one of them did have a healthy relationship throughout the movie. Like, because it would have been,
I think he was just up there trying to, coordinate, get Stifler out of there when, it started going down. It's like, what's going on? They're getting naked. Just everybody snaps to attention.
Right. All right. And then for me, I think there were little moments like there. Again, for me, I love how the movies have so much great character interaction. And so little moments, like the interactions between Jim and Michelle, the interactions between Jim and his dad, the part where the girl said, "You kiss that's how you kiss your mother," and Stifler's just like, "Don't you say anything," I love those little moments. The moment when Nadia and Sherman run upstairs and both Jessica and Stifler are like, "No effing way," and it's just like, the reactions that they had, the interactions, I thought were really good throughout.
Because his whole Arnold Schwarzenegger shtick worked on Nadia, and no one can believe that.
Well,
that was kind of nice to see something good happen to that character.
Yeah.
He was a jerk in the first one, but you figure he's at least learned a couple lessons.
He's learned a little bit. It's hard to say how much.
And he was publicly shamed at the end of that movie.
Yes,
so.
He was. But yeah, and Dustin, I don't know how much you caught me earlier. I was saying I can buy that whole thing much more than I used to, because if Nadia really had a flaming geek fetish, he probably would have scratched the itch for the night.
That would have worked pretty well, yeah.
Yeah. But
sometimes it does. Sometimes things like that do happen.
Yeah, people do have weird hang-ups that can lead to weird situations. As far as
about some of those small moments between characters, like Finch's whole thing with watering the plant.
Oh yeah, we forgot about the jizz-free ficus.
He's just watering the plant,
you stay away
all
from
three
that
of the guys are just staring at him what are you doing? And he gives that explanation, and then he's like, "You stay the fuck away from that ficus."
I think that was actually the line I remembered from the movie from the first time I saw it.
There are a lot of memorable lines in this movie. Yeah. It's hard to not want to quote them all.
Right.
But we should be wrapping up, I think. So.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's no question. This is the one where Michelle really became my favorite character. I agree. Some of the others are great in this one too. And I agree. Oz is kind of a nice, calm center that everyone else is going around. But definitely Michelle. So I guess that about wraps up American Pie 2. So I'll hand it back to you, Dave.
All righty. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to our discussion. Hopefully you have checked out the movie before you have landed where we are and have. But let us know down in the comments what you thought of both. And follow along with us as we continue this franchise throughout the month. But let's go around the room and let them know a little bit about each and every one of us. So why don't I start with you, Dustin? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yep, I have a YouTube channel called The Crypt of Horrors, where I attempt to show off the cool horror movie collection stuff that I used to find around town. And we're still working on reinventing, but hopefully new videos soon. So go subscribe to The Crypt of Horrors. You can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky as Cryptaxis, or, well, okay, Cryptaxis on Twitter, because Cryptaxis still isn't available. But I'm Cryptaxis on Blue Sky, and give me reasons to go use that. So my Instagram, Crypt of Horrors, is a little bit better for my posts just showing off the cool stuff I find. And I recently started doing the movie per day thing again on Letterboxd, where my name is Cryptaxis. So go follow me on all of those places and give me a reason to put more work into them. And with that, I'm going to head out. Good night, everybody. Like, share, and subscribe.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Actually, if I can run next, that way I can get out myself.
Go for it.
Sure.
SeptumSin versus the world. You should check us out because we got a lot of cool stuff. We'll be kind of going dark for a little bit while I work with Dave on finishing some of these projects, and also finish up my own room project. But we got a pickup video that we did, and we shared it with Dave's channel, Delusions of Grandeur. So you should check that out.
Mm-hmm.
And we have an anime discussion on F coming up Wednesday. So
yeah.
So we're not dead yet.
Not dead yet.
And good night.
All right, good night.
All righty.
Good night.
How about you, Tammy? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I basically go on this channel and another one with David and talk about movies with everybody and check out different movies. And I got my own collection, and right now that's about it till summertime comes and I take my car out again.
Yep. In fact, we've got your car's Christmas party coming up, so that'll be kind of cool. But how about you, Jake? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
All right, I'm Kotobukijake. I'm the co-host of SeptumSin versus the World, and as he said, we have a pretty good video coming out this week, and possibly two. F is an interesting series, and we should have a lively discussion about it, apparently. And I will keep it brief because I am really running my voice raw. I may regret it tomorrow, so I'm a little under the weather, but just thanks for joining us for this one, and we look forward to seeing y'all next week for American Wedding.
Alrighty. Well,
Alrighty. You have a good night.
Have a good night. And my name is David Strege. I'm one of the founding fathers of Inside Movies Galore. So thank you for coming along with us on this fantabulous journey we've been having. Hopefully you'll be along with us for the rest of the month and going forward, because we have a lot more in store for you. But I do moonlight on a different channel called Delusions of Grandeur, where I do go on similarly. Just recently we did a discussion on Joe's apartment recently. And then I guess this next week, this Sunday, we'll be touching on The Toxic Avenger. So I'm looking forward to that discussion. Haven't seen it in a while, and maybe I can show off my Toxie action figure that I recently got from Mo. So good times. But I do some pickup videos from time to time. In fact, I did one with you guys, and I'm honored to be to do it with you guys. Got most of. I actually forgot a few seasons of another series, but I'll get that in with this next batch of movies that is coming my way for a smaller video that I'll probably do later on. But that being said, like we said at the beginning, there are some albums that are listed below in the commentary. that you can buy either for AI assholes or Drawn Out Dark. And there are also still movies for sale, like Tales of the Forgotten and Amityville Webcam and the original short film that the Tales of the Forgotten actually came from. So definitely check those out. Beginning of this month, we're probably going to be finishing up at least the second anthology to the series, and hopefully you can keep an eye out for some of that good stuff. So in any case, like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see y'all next time here on Inside Movies Galore. Everyone say good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Alrighty. Come on. All right, come on.